GoPro little thing going on.
Cool. So we're live.
Oh, hi.
All right. So I guess we're going to start having people join us on the live stream. And if there's anyone that is on the live stream right now, you please feel more than welcome to type any questions that you have along the way. And if we have time at the end, we will make sure we try and get those answered. But we have a lot to cover today, so I think it's going to be really interesting. So let's just go ahead and start. First, I'll just introduce myself for anyone who's joining in for the first time. My name's Nadia, and I'm the founder of Zaya, a digital health platform helping people find holistic mental health support and care. And Beyond Modern Medicine is the podcast series and the online event series that I recently started, where the mission is to really educate and spread awareness on the holistic practices of medicine. And so throughout the series, I'll be interviewing different experts in the fields of medicine, in psychology and philosophy and anthropology and in science to really try and understand and learn their perspective on healing the mind and body beyond modern medicine. And so today I have with me Dr. Paul Wang, and Paul is an incredible doctor of acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. And we're going to be covering healing with Chinese philosophy. So let's just go ahead and get started. Paul, I'd love you to just introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Paul, and so I am a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I practice mainly in California, but in the last half decade or so, 4 or 5 years, I've had the opportunity and the honor to travel to different countries with an organization called Siyuan Balance Method, with my colleague, my co-teacher Delphine Armand, to I think it's like over 20 countries, over 5 continents. I haven't made it to Antarctica yet. to share about Chinese medicine and both the practices as well as the principles and the philosophy. And so I also teach self-cultivation practices like breath work and meditation, and also practice and teach martial arts. So sort of sometimes I use the alphabet A, B, C, D to summarize a bit what services, what practices I train, as well as also how I provide that as services. So the A is for acupuncture. The B is for actually birth chart analysis, or in Chinese we call it bazi, also B. And that's actually doing an analysis of, I call it temporal energetics, the energy of time that is coming into someone's life. So it's kind of also a psychological analysis of the strength and weaknesses. So that's the B. And C is for cultivation or self-care, which is, I think, a huge component because there are many modalities of healthcare. However, the primary relationship is we have with ourselves, and we're with ourselves 24 hours a day. Even if you go get treatment 3 or 4 times a week, that's just a few hours. But the rest of the week, it's how do you apply those insights that you get from healthcare practitioners on yourself directly. How do you embody it? So that's part of the cultivation practices. And the D is for self-defense. So that's the self-protection and body language training and how to train your nervous system not to overreact in conflict and threat situations, or even, for instance, if you have to be on a podcast or speak to a group. How do you process those kind of perhaps stressful stimulations in a way that you can keep balanced and keep your wits about you? So that's kind of the self-defense training aspect. So a little bit background about what I practice and what I offer to clients.
Okay. And so how did you actually get started in this? Like what got you interested into Chinese philosophy and Chinese medicine?
So I enjoy sports. So that got me into, when I got into college, especially, I thought, okay, I like sports. I like, studying how the human body works, performs. So I actually majored at UC Berkeley in human biodynamics and locomotion. So I was interested in biology and anatomy and physiology. And I was on the, modern medicine, Western medicine kind of track at Cal. I guess a couple things happened. One was I did a sort of hospital kind of shadowing intern kind of thing. And then, before that, I was just kind of like, more focused on the academic study of pre-medicine, right? Pre-med. And which is very interesting, intellectually satisfying. But when I saw actually how it was practiced, clinically as a profession, it blew my mind and it kind of scared me a bit. That it was super, intense and super stressful. And, the context seemed more about sick care, what I call sick care. Yeah. So you have a spectrum of care. On one side, you have sick care, which is focusing on getting rid of disease and illness, kind of down the line. And then I mentioned healthcare before. That's a bit more of a health restoration kind of paradigm. Not just getting rid of something called illness, but how do you restore health? And then I also mentioned self-care. That's actually maintaining health. Yeah. So before you lose health. Yeah. So, but I saw, and with that categorization, I saw, like, at least in the hospitals, like, well, all these, heroic, of course, but but psychologically, emotionally, mentally stressed healthcare practitioners. It didn't turn me off per se, but I thought, maybe it fits me better to work in a different part of that spectrum rather than the sick care model. And the second thing that happened at UC Berkeley, they have a democratic education at Cal, DCal classes, which are student-initiated courses sponsored by a professor. And someone started an integrative medicine course where every week, or maybe it was twice a week, they invited a complementary, alternative, integrative medicine practitioner, homeopathy, chiropractic, massage therapy, etc. And then one of the speakers was an acupuncturist and Chinese medicine practitioner. And it's a very simple statement, but it ties into what I said earlier. But she said that, Western medicine, the strength is diagnosing, in very high-tech, modern way, to the gene level, right? Disease factors, right? But traditional medicine, of which Chinese medicine is one example. Of course, there's also traditional Indian or Greek medicine, or indigenous medical practices that focus more on the healthcare part, which is restoring health. So rather than treating disease, we're treating the person, in other words. And I was like, wow, I never thought about it that way. It's very obvious maybe to a lot of people, or to me now, but that kind of shifted my thinking. And so instead of going into Western medical school, I went into Chinese medical school. And before I did so, this was like sophomore, junior year. So before I did so, I took advantage of the last 1 or 2 years at UC Berkeley to take courses in Eastern philosophy. So I kind of minored in Eastern philosophy, Eastern thought. Yeah. So the combination of Chinese philosophy and biology is Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
Wow.
So with your exposure to both biology as well as Chinese philosophy or Eastern philosophy, I'd love to hear you explain your perspective on the differences between both Western and Eastern philosophy in terms of how healing is defined. So as you said, healing in Western context can be looked at as disease-focused care, and where Eastern philosophy maybe takes on more of a whole body approach.
Yes.
I'd love just to kind of hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, most of us probably know, is that Western medicine, just in this practice, we know there's a lot of specializations, right? So why is that? Why is Chinese medicine, Western medicine or Western physiology, why does it separate into so many specializations? And the way I think about it, and this is true for any medicine, it doesn't come from nowhere. The practice of a medicine or a way of viewing physiology is rooted in a philosophical context. And in the West, like in the Enlightenment period, you had people like, John Locke, Francis Bacon, or Rene Descartes is probably one of the more famous ones, where, he was kind of credited with philosophical, it was a choice or decision to see the mind and body as separate. So it's kind of a splitting analysis, right? And Western medicine was based, one of the sort of applications, like an app, that employed these philosophical concepts, separation, splitting, all the way down, like I said, to the atomic, subatomic, or like to the cell genetic level. So breaking things down. Whereas Chinese medicine, is a way of viewing health, physiology, that's rooted in Chinese philosophy, which rather than analysis is more about synthesis, how things tie together and connect together. A lot of us have heard of yin and yang, right? So that's the concept of duality, but not duality as separate categories, like, the yin yang of mind and body, put one here, put one over there. It is more the relationship between yin and yang, of which mind and body is one example. So like you said, holistic. I would even say holographic. That is, rather than health, or let's say health is about being a part of the whole, rather than being apart from the whole, right? So how do you connect all these disparate parts together? The philosophy is one of another thing besides the duality of yin and yang is also humans and nature. We say tian ren he di. Tian is nature, ren is humanity, are one. So that's another philosophical concept. So you can't divorce mind from body, or emotions as the currency between mind and body, the communication between mind and body, or the conscious and subconscious, nor humans from nature. And so the key is to find the bridge, the balance, the relationship, the sort of healthy dance between the duality. And furthermore, I would say one last level is that Chinese philosophy is a certain way of viewing life that, again, doesn't come from just randomly from nowhere. It comes from a certain way of viewing reality. So that gets to the cosmology level. Whereas, for instance, in Western, you have Western physics and cosmology, right? And there's also a Chinese conception of cosmology, which ties into what I said earlier about the relationship between, dualities and finding the connection. But perhaps I can throw out a third concept related to cosmology is, maybe you've heard of microcosm and macrocosm. So there's a trinity of tian ren di, which is sky or celestial factors or forces. For instance, on Earth, the ionosphere, right, which is sort of the electrochemical shield of Earth that protects us from gamma rays or excess solar radiation. So that's part of the sky part, the magnetic field, right, which is unfortunately which is shifting now, right, which is one of perhaps several dozen kind of slow disasters that are happening. The magnetic field weakening in certain areas, like between off the coast of South America, for instance. So that's tian, that's the heaven or sky aspect, and then tian ren di. Di is actually terrestrial. That's like Gaia, that's Mama Earth. So that's another huge factor too. That everything that we do to Earth, returns to us, affects us too, right? So one of the greatest problems going on is some call it the sixth mass extinction, right? So there's certain places in the world where everyone knows about the bees, right? The colony collapse of the bees. But it's not just bees. It's, I think some places, 75 to 90% of insect species are no longer there. Yeah. And then also birds as well. So a lot of these more sensitive species are being, are going extinct. And a lot of them actually pollinate, plants that not just humans rely on for food, but also other animals. So that's a problem too. So anyways, there's an interrelationship between the forces up there and the forces down there. And then the Ren is the middle part. So you have upper, lower, and middle, the trinity of the three, which features a lot in Chinese philosophy, Chinese cosmology, as well as is directly applied to Chinese medicine. And I can give you some examples of that later on. And so, of course, the Ren part is the fact that, I mentioned a little bit the holographic idea, which is that within every part is the whole. So every human is humanity. Again, you cannot separate the individual from its social context. So the more perhaps a positive way of looking at it is like it's sort of like an average, right? So if I can improve my average of humaneness and humanity, then as an individual representative, then it may raise the bar of humanity, maybe just 0.001%. But I am a hologram, right? I am one in terms of the accounting of humanity on planet Earth. Maybe I can do a little bit of difference, and if I can inspire others to do so, then it adds up. It adds up, yeah. And hopefully more of us can wake up to that sooner than later, because I don't think we have too much time left with this human experiment.
Oh,
so yeah, so that's kind of the context at 3 stages between physiology, rooted in philosophy, rooted in cosmology. And the main thing is this kind of idea of wholes, right? Every part is a whole, just like in the body, right? Every single cell in the nucleus, we have a complete set of our DNA, which encodes for the whole person, right? So every part of us, is included in the whole individual. Every individual is a part of the whole of humanity. The human species, Homo sapiens, is a part of the kingdom Animalia, right? And Animalia is one of the 5 or 6 kingdoms of life on Earth, right? And Earth is a part of the solar system. The solar system is part of the Milky Way. The Milky Way is part of the local supercluster Laniakea, right? Which is part of the universe, which is part of the multiverse. So it's a model that scales, like, you're using a map app, right? You can scale in and out, right? Scale down to the city level to deal with problems there, or you can scale out to the country level, or you can drill in even to your city block. So it's this very flexible view of trying to see the whole picture within the parts. So it sounds very simple, but it's a very powerful paradigm. Both, and at least for this podcast, is mainly how to apply that towards health, right? Mental and emotional and physical health.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was going to ask you, is like, with this sort of interconnectedness, I like to call it holograms. We're holograms of consciousness, and we are very much all connected with one another. And so it's, how do you take that sort of idea, how do you take that concept and apply that in health? I think that one thing that I really want to touch on is how physical illnesses and psychological symptoms are often caused by imbalances in the mental and the emotional and the physical body. And so we can kind of see that in many different cultures, that sort of same pattern of mind, body, spirit, or physical, chemical, emotional, mental, emotional, physical. There's so many different ways to explain it. And so with this sort of concept of how everything is interconnected in this microcosm, in this macrocosm, how is our physical and our mental health impacted by this interconnectedness?
Yeah. So I feel like we threw out a lot of concepts that maybe are kind of abstract. So I think the way I want to go with it is give a little bit of example, and then maybe an application in terms of a physical, how to apply some of this philosophy to a physical problem, and then get more into the emotional and mental aspect, and maybe even spiritual. Okay? So a very simple example, because this again seems kind of perhaps abstract, sounds great as a philosophy, but this is not very complicated or mystical at all in terms of, mind-body duality as one paradigm versus that it's connected. For instance, a very simple example, such as like a physical state, like your bladder is full, right? And you really need to pee, right? So that's a physical state, right? What happens to your emotional and mental state in that case, right?
Yeah.
It's a physical. It's only a physical thing, right? Body doesn't affect emotion or mind. Is that true? No. Like your emotions, like, oh my god, like you get really nervous, like that you're gonna pee in your pants, or like you get really nervous, you can't find a restroom. And mentally, what happens? You can't even pay attention to your friend talking to you, or the movie, right? You're watching a movie. The only thing on your mind is, I got to get to the bathroom. I got to find a bathroom, right? So it's a very simple example. When your bladder is full, you need to pee. Then it affects your emotions and mentality, and it's pretty direct, and it's pretty spontaneous, and it's pretty instant, right? So again, it's not mystical or complex at all, and vice versa. So that's kind of physical state affecting the emotions, affecting the mind, and vice versa is the case too. Let's just say you call something to mind, and you think of a beloved, right? Maybe your late grandma, right? Maybe your late grandma, and who raised you, and you really love her, right? You really miss her, and then you think of a lovely memory, when you were watching Wheel of Fortune or something, some game show with her, something very mundane, but like, wow, like you just had a memory flashing. And then what happens? That's a mental imagination, a mental image, but you probably get a little smirk on your face, right? It causes a physical change. You're like, your body language changes. You start to feel warm and fuzzy, right? And your emotional state changes too. Maybe you were having a stressful day, or you had an argument with your partner, but for whatever reason, you were sitting there and you just thought of your lovely grandma, and then you forgot about the anger, the anger from the argument, 5 minutes ago dissipated, and you felt love instead. So that's the something in the mind affecting the emotions, affecting the body. So it's both bottom up and top down. Again, that trinity of upper, middle, and upper, middle, and lower, right? The mental, emotional, and physical. So I just want to say that because I don't want to make it seem too abstract. So those are two examples of mind, emotion, and body affecting each other. And just to throw in there, I mentioned the spiritual, right? Again, there's different models, but I think most people, even the most hardcore atheistic, materialistic scientists would agree. We have a mental state, right? Our thoughts. We have emotional state, our emotions, our feelings, right? And a physical, right? And those are kind of like the three phases of water, for instance, right? You have the solid, which is the physical, the ice, right? And then you have the liquid, which are like the emotions, right? That flow. And then you have the clouds, the gas, like the thoughts, right? So the way I tie in spirituality to it is I define that as the optimization, the quality of each of those three, your mental, emotional state, your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. And for instance, from confused, I mentioned cloud or foggy brained, to focused and concentrated, right? And so the latter is more optimal. And in terms of the emotional state, from agitation, your emotions are all over the place, to flow, right? It doesn't mean you're robotic and numb and don't feel emotions. You embrace all emotions, but you're not caught up in any one, right? You accept all the flavors, all the colors. And then for the physical state, instead of like pain and tension, right, or poor posture, you're relaxed and you're aligned, right, in your body. So again, from a more disintegrated to integrated state, from a more decoherent to a coherent state, from a misaligned to an aligned state, from a stressed to unstressed state. So that's optimization. Or sometimes I use the word intelligence. You have a mental intelligence, emotional intelligence, and physical intelligence. that come with the package. Actually, these are natural states. Unfortunately, a lot of our lifestyle and practices are unnatural. So we go from a state of intelligence to ignorance. We ignore the natural principles. We ignore our self-care. So instead of tapping into that intelligence, which is digesting your breakfast, that is, or for you, dinner, that is beating your heart, tens of thousands of times. That's an operating system that comes preloaded in the hardware. And that's another example, right? The body is the hardware, the mind is the software, but that's not sufficient, right? You got your phone, the hardware part. You have the software on there, the operating system, the apps, but you also need energy, right? Electricity. So that's the emotions, the energy in motion. In Chinese medicine, the emotions are related to a concept called qi, vital energy, and the emotions are simply different trajectories of that qi, of that energy. And so the optimization of these states is the first step, but they also should be coordinated and aligned. Sometimes I use an analogy of, say you're highly developed, right? Mentally, emotionally, and physically, right? You're super smart, you're super empathetic, and you're physically in shape, right? And that's great. But what we also need to do, that's kind of like a sports team with 3 superstars, right? However, it doesn't mean that they're going to win the championship. They need to be coordinated, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, those 3 superstars could clash. So there's another dimension, which is the alignment, like having a good coach, right? Mm-hmm. To coach these 3 well-trained, high-performing superstars. And to me, that is the spiritual aspect, is when you align mentally, emotionally, and physically, automatically spirituality emerges. Has nothing to do with religion per se, nothing bad with religion per se, but you could have that state arise in the subway, right? When you are just physically present and relaxed, just sitting there, when your emotions are in flow and your mind is present, and you can have a spiritual moment in sitting in the subway, or walking to the grocery store or something like that. So the one application. So that's kind of a little bit of background. I said earlier that I wanted to give one application example of how we apply, since this is called Healing with Chinese Philosophy, how we apply these physical, philosophical concepts to health. So let's look at that trinity I mentioned earlier of upper, middle, and lower, right? The heaven, the human, and the earth aspect, right? So we have that in nature, the sky, right? And then the life, and then life forms, trees, animals, humans, and then the earth below. So in the body, we also have those 3 levels. And if you look at the torso, right, the head is above, right? So that's like the heaven or the sky aspect of the torso. And then you have the chest, right, in the middle, right, from the neck to the navel, let's say. That's like the human level, the middle level. And then you have the navel to the perineum, to the base of the body. That's like the earth part of the torso. Okay, all right. And then on the arm, can we also divide the arm into those 3 levels? Yes. You have the hand, right, which is the upper, right, the distal. You have the forearm, which is the second segment, right? That's kind of the middle. And then you have the lower part, which is the upper arm, right? You have upper, middle, and lower, upper, middle, and lower. So again, okay, that's nice. We mapped that kind of observation of nature having 3 levels to our body in 2 parts, the torso part and the upper limb part. And in terms of how we apply that in acupuncture is that, for instance, a lot of us have like neck and shoulder pain, right? Maybe 70-80% of people have that from using their phones, right? So one direct way to to treat that, right? And with acupuncture, we would use needles. But for if you're not an acupuncturist, you can just use acupressure, right? So, and this ties into the holograms earlier, right? So the arm, right, is a part of the body, but it contains the whole trinity, right? The torso is part of the body, but it contains the whole trinity. So these parts align. So if you want to treat a head problem, you can find points on the hand to press to treat. If you have a problem between the neck and navel, there are points, right, which is the middle segment. There are points on the forearm that you can press or needle. And finally, if you have a problem in the lower abdomen, right, uterus or bladder, right, or genital, then you can use the lower part of this hologram, right, the arm hologram that is on the upper arm to treat it, right? And so let's just use neck pain as an example, right? So here's the neck. The neck is junction, right, between the upper and middle part. So where is that on the hologram of the arm? Between the hand and the forearm, right? So can you find some points around the wrist to treat the neck, right? Yes. Yes. So if any of you have neck pain out there, right, you can, I would start with maybe, you can think of it as 3 lines, right? A line on the thumb side, a line on the pinky side, and a line in the middle. You can start, I would say, in my experience, you can start on, close to the wrist on the thumb side, find a point there, press on it, rub it, and then you can move your neck, right? Say, oh, wow, actually, I feel like I'm able to move it further, right? Or front and back like this, right? And you can use this kind of, segment here, maybe 3-finger width. Try another point, go a little bit down, right? And then also try to move your neck, right? And say, oh, wow, the pain was a 9 out of 10 before, and now it went down to 5 out of 10, 4 out of 10. And then again, the trinity, right? Try a third point, a little bit further down. Press it, rub it. And if it's sensitive where you press it, that's good. That's a good switch. Like flipping a light switch on the wall, right? To turn on a light on the ceiling, right? So you're using this switch here on the wrist to turn on and off a signal to your neck. Yeah? So that's just one simple example, right? And through my clinical practice and also my colleagues and students and my teacher, Dr. Tan, who taught me this way of practicing balance method. It's a balance between different parts of the body. It works, right? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases. So those of you who are on this or watching this or listening to this, you can try it. Yeah. Of course, a professional acupuncturist who's trained will be able to be more precise. Yeah. But that's just a very simple thing that you can play with, right? And we can look at more examples, but I just wanted to illustrate some of the philosophy that I mentioned and how it applies to physiology and how we can use certain techniques and applications to treat ourselves, right? For self-care.
Very interesting. So I kind of want to go back a little bit from what you were saying and ask you, what are some of the practices, you talk about this alignment and when the mental, physical, and the, what was it again that you said?
Emotional, yeah.
Yeah, and the emotional are all aligned. That's when the spiritual aspect kind of really turns on. And so what are some of those practices that people can do to create that sort of, to facilitate or kickstart that spiritual sort of experience within that alignment?
Yeah, there are so many, and that come from different traditions. Of course, I have kind of my set of practices that I teach, but it doesn't have to be what I offer, to my clients. I would say, that, speaking of philosophy, my main practices are from the Chinese cultural tradition, but I'm also a proponent of the philosophia perennis, which is the perennial philosophy, which is the idea that universal wisdom let's have an image. You think of a forest, right? A forest floor, right? And you don't see it because it's underground and it's very fine, but there is a vast, many square miles, square kilometers of a network, like an internet, called the mycelium, right? A fungal network underground. Yeah? And when the conditions are right, temperature, humidity, or often after rain, boom, you have, these lovely brethren or brothers and sisters from another kingdom of fungi we call mushrooms, or the fungi kingdom, which the Animalia, of which Homo sapiens are a member of, we co-evolved with, right? But anyways, not to go too far in that direction, but the philosophia perennis is the fact that, in different cultures and different geographies in different times, the universal wisdom will sprout in particular ways, using different forms and terms and symbols, right? So the ones that I mainly use are, from the Chinese tradition, and the practices, therefore, that I offer are more from that background. Because in Chinese culture, we have Confucian philosophy and Taoist philosophy, even Buddhist philosophy. I mean, that's kind of an import from China, but it was kind of adapted to Chinese culture. So I think a lot of people, for instance, what's really popular is like yoga and meditation, right? And again, many different lineages and many different styles, right? So I'm not trying to evade, your question, but I'm of the opinion that everyone should try different things. Yeah, be open-minded, right? Literally, and try what works. You ask around. If you want to work with me, of course, you can contact me. But ask around, and for the mental, of course, we think of mindfulness, meditation practices. Some which include more visualizations, or they include contemplation, right? So ways to actually bring your mind into focus and in the present moment. So that would be kind of more sort of meditation practices. For emotional, let me use what I said earlier about emotions being energy in motion, and also this Chinese concept of qi, which is not just Chinese. In the Greek culture, they call it pneuma, right? Which is like air or wind, right? In Tibetan culture, they call it long, I think, yeah, which is wind, right? In I think in the Hebrew tradition, they call it ruach, right? So in Chinese tradition or Japanese, they call it ki. So this idea of a certain kind of vital energy, which I would say is most strongly expressed and experienced in the human form as emotions. So qi in Chinese also very common connotation, meaningful translation is breath. So any kind of breath work will also pretty directly affect the emotions, right? And again, there are dozens of different traditions, yeah. And even within a tradition, you have different kinds of breath. Right? Of course, again, I mentioned yoga. That's one of the more popular ones. But even modern forms like Dr. Stan Grof, who developed holotropic breathwork. That's another example. Or another modern example is like Butenko technique. And for instance, there's a teacher called Patrick McCown. He wrote a book called Oxygen Advantage. So if you think about it very simply, right? If you are feeling okay, but you just change your breathing to very short and shallow, okay, like everyone follow me and try this, right? Breathing with your mouth short and shallow. After 30 seconds of that, you're going to start to feel very jittery and insecure, right? And nervous, right? So breath affects your emotional state, right? Which again affects your mental state, affects, right, your physical state too. And vice versa, right? If you do the opposite, breathe deep, right, into your abdomen, using your diaphragm, slow your breathing down, right? Focus more on breathing from the nose and on the exhalation, which is the more yin aspect, right? The more quieting aspect. So take a deep breath and then exhale slowly. And even hold your breath a little bit out at the end. One little funny thing is like I was playing with this kind of breath work, and some pharmacies, they have the breath the cuff, to measure the blood pressure. You put your arm in there and you press the button, and I looked, oh, okay, my blood pressure is, wow, it's 130/90, and my heart rate is let's say 80, right? And I was like, okay, I'm gonna reset and then do my breath work, especially focusing on strengthening the inhale and lengthening the exhale, and then holding it out a little bit, and then pressing the button, and wow, actually within 30 seconds my blood pressure went down to 110 over 70, and the heart rate went down to 65. So that's just a little example of using breath, and also I felt really calm afterwards, right? I felt really calm and relaxed. So I would say any kind of breath work is very good for adjusting the emotions. And then, physical training, wow, there's so much, right? Stretching, or again, yoga, it's very popular, so that's why I mentioned it. But it could be hiking, or it could be, there's some things like, what are those pods where you're floating in body temperature water?
Like the sensory deprivation tanks.
Yeah, kind of, right? They put
float tanks.
Yeah, flotation tanks, right? Yeah, where it's dark and silent, and then the water is your body temperature, and you're floating because they put Epsom salts in there, right? Yeah. And so you don't have to make any effort to float, and so that's a kind of a putting yourself in a physical situation where you don't actually have to do anything, unlike yoga or hiking or something like that. Yeah. But which is maybe the hard thing, to do nothing, right? Because we're so much a doing culture. So some people may feel claustrophobic in that kind of situation. But I tried it, and it's actually, I found it very relaxing. So there's many things like that. So find what works for you to tune, to optimize. I'm using that word, or to relax. Your physical, emotional, and mental. I just threw out just a few examples. I have my own practices too. For instance, another one I like to use is infrared light therapy. Like red light saunas, or actually bought a kind of a personal one to use. So that's a whole nother discussion. Electromagnetic, right, is a kind of falls in the category of qi too, energy. So electromagnetism affects directly our physical, emotional, and mental state. So so blue qi, or blue light, is predominant in modern culture because of all the screens and devices we use. I think in the last couple of years, there's been more awareness about like blue light filters, because basically what it does is shuts down melatonin production, which we know is the sleep hormone. So that's why counterbalancing the blue with the red is one way to use light as kind of a medicine, which again affects your mood, affects your mental state, and your hormones, your circadian rhythm too. So so there's even kind of modern technology, that we can tap into as well. And again, like I said, so to me, the proportionality of each of those, it's like in school we have our grade point average, at least in the United States, right? So you may be super smart, you have really, really focused up here, you have A+ here, but your emotions are like C or D level, and your physicality is so C, right? So to be fully healthy, you need to increase your overall GPA. It doesn't have to be 4.0. A being 4, B being 3, C being 2, but at least this framework can help you say, oh wow, like I'm pretty good, like I feel pretty good with my intellectual intelligence, my head brain, but my heart brain, my emotional intelligence feels off, my intuition, or my physical intelligence, my instinct, I haven't really trained or tapped into. So maybe I want to go to salsa classes, to get really into my body. Or do something physical like martial arts or something to really empower my animal instinct. And the more you optimize again, and the more you align, then then you tap into that spiritual state, which is actually our natural state. And of course, some masters, they went all out in the spiritual pursuit. They got a master's, they got a PhD, they got a postdoc, to use an academic analogy. So they research spirituality first time, and they get to very high level. They get to the top of the mountain, right? And the rest of us are just kind of, rotating around the bottom or on our way up. So there are, village people, yeah. And so there are spiritual geniuses, right? Again, like throughout history and place and time, that have, we know Buddha, we know Jesus, we know Muhammad, but even the minor ones that maybe that aren't kind of documented historically, that affect local cultures. So we don't have to get to that level. It's nice to have teachers and masters and role models to help us hike up the mountain as guides, but we have to find our own way. And one thing I want to say, again, tying back into philosophy, I'm kind of, going back to the title of our talk, Healing with Chinese Philosophy, is I want to share one kind of quote from a philosopher who actually, about 2,500 years ago, actually in different cultures, I mentioned Greece. So in Greece, there was Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. In India or Nepal, there was Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. He became a Buddha, right? And in ancient China at this time, this was in the Zhou dynasty, the latter or Eastern Zhou dynasty, which was broken down into two periods, a spring and autumn period, as well as the second part was the Warring States period. So just think of that name, Warring States. What happened was that that the Zhou powers was fragmented into hundreds of different states, right? Like in the United States, we have 50 states, right? But in China at the time, right, the country became embroiled in a lot of local conflicts. So there's all these local like governors, right? That had different, they didn't agree with the central power. So my point is that this was a time of great turmoil, a lot of violence, bloody conflicts, right? So much social unrest, kind of like we have now, right? With the pandemic and a lot of kind of the shadow side, the dark side of humanity coming to the surface. Which in a way it's good, right? But it's painful what we're kind of going through. A lot of people are suffering, but this is not the first time. Maybe this is the most global. In the past, it was more local. Right? Rather than pandemic, it was epidemics, or rather than like, nuclear war that can destroy all of humanity and all life on Earth. It was just more, spears and, swords, but you can still, they kill the whole villages, right? So in this warring state period, which eventually, the smaller states were annexed by larger states. So there were 7 states that remained, one of which was the Qin dynasty. The Qin state, which eventually unified China. So anyways, during this time, there was the Zhuzi Baijia, the varied masters, sages, and the 100 schools. So these were like the system theorists, the systems thinkers of the time. The smartest minds are like, what can we do to fix this social, political, economic issues, right? So many people are dying. There for about 500 years, there were wars, warfare. So this is the climate, like that's kind of a pretty shitty situation. But this was also a flourishing of the the best minds of the time to try to find a solution. And so this was passed down, over centuries and actually millennia to us now. So I think it's relevant to consider, in this modern time, some of these ancient insights. And so there was Confucius, who spoke, his main kind of slogan or theme was about harmony and keeping to the center, moderation, finding the middle way, and everyone playing their role in society that creates harmony, right? The kings must king, the ministers must minister, the fathers must father, the son must son, etc. Right? So everyone needs to be responsible in their social roles. There was also Lao Tzu, which was a representative of later on what was called the Taoist philosophy, And he was about aligning with nature, outer nature and inner nature, and cultivating trust, right? So when you have trust, then it automatically lowers your stress, right? If you trust your nature and you feel that you're one with the nature, your nature in here is one with the nature out there. It prevents your autonomic nervous system from being triggered into the flight or fight stage, right? So that's kind of Taoist cultivation. And then we have Sun Tzu, which was known for the art of war. So he focused on more tactical and strategic philosophies to try to be smart about how to deal with conflicts. And then there was also Mo Tzu, which was a representative of the Maoist philosophy. And this was pre-Christian, but he spoke about like Christ didn't come until 500 years later. But Mo Tzu was already talking about things like universal love and compassion. This is even before the Buddha too, as well as rewarding the worthy, right? In society, you want to try to find the people with talent, regardless of their background, even if they're poor and not educated, but you want to elevate the worthy people, right? And so what I want to kind of share is from the Taoist philosophy, and because it is pretty directly related to Chinese medicine. And in the Tao Te Ching, a book that attributed to Lao Tzu, he says that Dao ke Dao fei cang Dao, which I translate as a path, okay, a path that is paved is never the only way. Is never the only way, right? So we think about that mountain again, right? And I take the northern trail up, right? And you take the southern trail up, right? We all have our own way. Just because I take the northern trail, it doesn't mean that that's the only or even the best way. It's just the one I chose, right? And so we're talking about healing with Chinese philosophy. So what that means, you take that statement is that, for instance, in acupuncture, I showed you an example of how to treat neck pain, but that's not the only way. I probably know a dozen ways to treat neck pain, right? So that allows for adaptability and flexibility. And even humility. Don't think that you have the only way, dude. And also in terms of what's going on now, right? So much, right? Conflict between not just North and South, right? Between left and right, between the liberals and the conservatives, between the Democrat and the Republican, between racial groups, black and white, right? So it's very important actually to apply just that one line, like, your way or a way is not the way, right? And no one has the final say. So if we can just apply that one thing, that's a kind of philosophical medicine, not just for our individual wellness, but that can help our social interactions, and then writ large, hopefully, like our even political and economic frameworks. It's not easy, of course. It sounds simple, but we need these kind of little guiding principles that I'm drawing from the Chinese wisdom traditions, but it's you can draw from your own. We're just using this as a focus for today. But the key thing is, and actually to the word philosophy, it's one of my favorite words. Why? You have philia or philos, right? In the first part, in Greek, it means love, right? And so Sophy, philosophy, or Sophia means wisdom, right? So love of wisdom, right? Whether it's, again, we're talking about Chinese philosophy, I don't care, but the key thing is that we need more of that nowadays, right? Love and wisdom rather than fear and ignorance, rather than hate and arrogance, right? So this is how philosophy can be, again, an antidote or immunization against, these more yin forces, right? So again, that yin and yang. So and there's other philosophies related to emotions. If you want to get, like we said earlier, you want to get more into the mental and emotional aspect, and we can talk more about that. I don't know how we are on time though. We're actually about
Going by fast.
It went by fast.
Yeah. So with your background in both understanding philosophy and medicine, how is it that that disease originates within the body?
Yeah, so there are, we say in Chinese medicine, we talk about there being inner and outer factors, right? Outer factors are like infectious diseases, right? Or injury, these kind of things. Or someone out there objectively, like the other, right? Attacking you with words or physically. So that's an outer factor, right? And then there's inner factors, like our own traumas, right? Our own memories from the past, which no longer exist per se, but they're perpetuated, right? Through our remembering of them, or even projections into the future, right? Fantasy, imagination, negative anticipation, right? That's also an inner internally generated factor that can affect our trinity, right, of mental, emotional, and physical. So I would say both of these are mediated by what I talked about earlier, the autonomic nervous system, right? Whether it is you see someone about to attack you, with a punch, or you see the news, right? All this kind of chaos, right? All this, statistics, all these articles, right? That trigger you. Why do they trigger you? They're triggering your nervous system, especially the autonomic nervous system, which is the subconscious part, right? Or let me give you a very simple example. You watch a scary movie, right? And when you get to a scene where someone is getting their head chopped off, what happens? Right? You're like this, right? That's something that's not even real. It's a 2-dimensional projection, maybe HD, right? Surround sound, but it's just pixels on a screen. But it's affecting you, right? That external factor is directly affecting your physical posture, right? You get this tension, right? And then you get your heart rate going up, and then wow, you have fear, and this triggering, like I said, of your flight or fight response, right? And such that even 2 hours later, when we go to dinner, I'm still kind of like this, and you're like, Paul, are you okay? You look a little bit stressed. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And then I look at myself and say, wow, what? I'm still holding the tension from the movie 2 hours ago, and again, it's not even real. It's a virtual reality. And the same thing with, sort of anxiety due to worrying about the future, or depression due to attachment in the past, right? In a way, they aren't real anymore, right? They're generated within, right? Not a movie outside, but a movie inside. But they affect the autonomic nervous system the exact same way, right? When you still imagine, that person who betrayed you, who cheated on you, 1 month ago, then it becomes 1 year ago, then it becomes 1 decade ago, right? And you perpetuate that, with your intention, right? Or you worry about something, like the world is ending, you worry about the Armageddon, apocalypse, the unveiling, the revelations. That isn't right now, but you're anticipating that it's coming, right? And that will also trigger your body into the sympathetic dominance, which is the flight or fight. You're ready to run away, or you're ready to defend yourself, right? And so whatever practice it is, mental, emotional, physical, focused, or you can summarize it as spiritual practices like chanting mantras, doing mudras, pilgrimages, drumming, these kind of things, quote unquote spiritual practices, but they involve, of course, the mind, heart, and the body too, right? They integrate them. So whatever it is, I would say in a very simple way, all of these are just trying to get you from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state, to go from a flight or fight to a rest and digest, to feel safe, A lot of us don't feel safe, right? Because of our gender identity, our racial identity, our economic situation, right? Our ethnic or national identities, right? Especially in some countries, right? So in order for healing to occur, which is related to the word whole, heal, whole, well, they're related. Yeah. So wellness is wholeness. And part of that is dissolving the boundaries between self and other. Yeah. If I see the other, it's fine that I see the other, right? But when I insert a poor relationship, one that is adversarial or conflict or of scarcity, that will trigger my autonomic nervous system to fight or flight or defend. Yeah. So when you go see an acupuncturist, or when you have a place at home that you set up as sort of a refuge where you do your meditation, you have your incense or whatever, or you go to church, right? Or you go to nature, right? I think it's important, whatever modality, whatever time, space that you choose, it's important to have a place where it is really like a refuge where you can feel safe. And what happens in that state is the rest and digest state is, and actually there's also another thing, is it's also your fertility. So what shuts down when you're in that flight or fight mode is your digestion. And how many people have digestive issues, right? So many people have digestion problems, all those terms, IBS, Crohn's, even ulcer, right? Another thing that shuts down is fertility, right? Because in a survival emergency situation, flight or fight state, you're giving your body either from an external factor or internal imagination that it's not safe to eat, right? Because when you're there eating, you're vulnerable, right, for attack, right? Because someone can come from behind you, right? And it's also not safe to have a baby, right? So a lot of people's fertility, both male and female, shut down, right? Or infertility, or even like for men, like impotence or erectile dysfunction, all that, is actually due to a threat, living in threat. And so when, sometimes it's very funny when I do acupuncture with my patient or whatever, I guide them in a meditation. Often afterwards, it's like, I'm starving. Where's the nearest taqueria? I want to get a burrito. Their appetite returns, right? Because they forgot that they were hungry because they were in that emergency state. We all have that. Like when we're trying to pull all-nighter to finish an exam, we forget to eat. Or we're driving cross country, we forget to eat, right? Because we're in that emergency state. And when we relax, you're like, oh my God, I'm starving, right? Or women will say, like, when I got on the plane to go to Hawaii, that's when my period started. My period shut down because of stress, right? You hear that from women athletes, right? They train so hard that their period stops, right? So it's actually quite simple. Whatever modality, whatever tool, whatever wisdom or insight that you apply clinically or as self-care is to bring us into a safe space. Yeah. And so a practitioner who can cultivate that, who feels safe and trusts in themselves, who has the capacity to embrace both the so-called positive and negative emotions, who may have went through shit, who has maybe been wounded, right, mentally, emotionally, and physically, actually can be alchemized into empowering other people. So it's very interesting. A lot of, at least in Chinese medicine, I know a lot of colleagues, they actually went into Chinese medicine to become a healer because they were previously a patient. So instead of receiving these modalities and these practices as a patient that helped them, they're like, wow, that was amazing. It really helped me with my depression, with my PCOS, with my my grieving process, losing my parent or something like that. I want to dive into it more and actually become a practitioner to help other people. Yeah, and so on and so forth. And this is how, like I said earlier about humans and humanity, so we can affect each other to up the average of Homo sapiens, because we're not doing so good, our score. We forget that we're humans, actually, fellow humans, let alone earthlings, right? Yeah. And hopefully we can draw from these wisdom traditions to heal ourselves, to see the hologram, to see the the whole in the part and the part in the whole, whether it's from a Chinese tradition or Mesoamerican or South Asian or Celtic or pagan, I don't know, whatever, that whatever forms or symbols you use, we had a previous conversation, psychedelic medicine, right, which is very powerful, and I think that's a trend, psychedelic technologies moving forward, to just open our mind, and open our hearts, and find more connection rather than walls that divide us. It's so simple. It's damn difficult because the fear kicks in, and we get into that you want to fight me, or I want to run away state and ignore and not be willing to stay and listen. We want to crawl up into a cave, which is okay for a time, but I think it's really important, especially in this very drastic and dramatic situation right now, that people cultivate their self-care, right? Because I deal a lot with healthcare practitioners who sometimes forget their self-care, because they're so about helping other people. Or even I have friends who are social justice activists. There's been a lot of protests and demonstrations, but they need to take care of themselves too, in order to fulfill their vision or their mission as well. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Definitely. I really love how you really you talk about like the whole picture of it, of both the physiological, not just the physiological, but also the psychological and the spiritual factors that can really contribute to our health and our well-being. And I think that it's so important. It's so essential to be able to speak to that. So I love everything that you've said. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, there was that word in our kind of previous conversation I had about. I don't know if I'm the first one to coin it, but we talk about medicine, Western medicine, Chinese medicine. Sometimes we criticize Western medicine is about just popping a pill or something like that, right? And of course I'm maybe a bit biased, or it sounds like I'm biased, like, oh, Chinese medicine is better, it's synthetic, it's holistic. Western medicine is just treating the symptoms or something like that. I don't think so. I think sick care, taking care of illness and disease is important. Healthcare is important. Self-care is very important. I would say out of the three, probably self-care is most important. And also all those different layers, from physiology to chemistry to biology to psychology to mental health, right? To spirituality, all those layers are important. So rather than medicine, I think we need a medicine, META, right? Yeah, medicine, yeah. So I just thought of that. I like to wordsmith a little bit. So maybe that's a way that we can summarize, like tying everything together from this relatively short talk today. But I guess we're kind of winding down. But I want to take a moment to thank my teachers. One was Dr. Tan, who's my main medical teacher. He passed away, unfortunately. One is Sifu Brand. He was my main martial teacher. And then Master Yu, who was my mystical spiritual teacher. He unfortunately passed earlier this year too. So I want to give thanks to them for what they've transmitted to me, and I try to integrate and pass on with my own kind of vibe. And I want to thank everyone who's listening and watching this. As we know, everybody's trying to vie for your time and attention nowadays. And so I consider it a precious gift that you guys, and you, Nadia, offered that to us today.
Thank you so much, and thank you to your teachers for teaching you and passing on this wisdom so that you can just be a part of that lineage and continue to share and spread this knowledge. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
As always, thank you. And thanks so much to everyone else that has tuned in today. We have actually one question. Someone asked, how did you find your mentors?
It's a mystery. It's a mystery. Nadia wrote a lovely article sharing her experience visiting Machig Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan teacher, and he spoke about karma, right? Which is causality in terms of physics, right? Causality. The observer affects the observed, etc. And there's even the kind of the idiom, I think it is, you would call it, of when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Yeah. And or I would say that I didn't find them, they found me, But I would also say it this way, that mentors and teachers are everywhere, everywhere. You just stare at the tree, like, oh my God, wow, right? How is this? There's like a 80-foot tree right there in front of me. Like, what? How is that? Like, teach me how to stand. So principled, aligned, yeah, and rooted, into something deeper, and then giving of myself, shade, fruits, oxygen, right? So there's a teacher right there, right? If you have the eyes to see. Or what I love is children, right? Like amazing teachers, right?
Definitely.
Like for instance, you think you're all that, some high level master, right? Go hang out with a 2-year-old for a while. See if you have your equanimity, right? Your nobility and your compassion.
Yeah.
Like, man, I want to kill that, crime. See, it's perfect teacher.
Yeah.
Or another example is like, this is a paraphrase story of like, let's say the seeker. Maybe the person who asked that question is a seeker. I'm a seeker, and you travel. Oh, you hear about Dalai Lama. You hear about Lady Gaga, whatever person that inspires you, right? And you make time, you pay the ticket, wow, $80, whatever, to buy a ticket to see Lady Gaga for inspiration. You travel around the world, to Indonesia, to Nepal, to Peru, to wherever.
I love how you're naming all the countries.
Wherever, temples in China or Bhutan or whatever, Burma.
Yeah.
To find it, that's cool, dude. That kind of external pilgrimage is great. But what actually happens is the internal journey, right? To finding your center and everything that inspires you about the Dalai Lama or Lady Gaga is projected. I mean, they embody it, but it's also projected, right? You're seeking it. So something is coming from the inside. The seeker is the sought. So if you can reverse that and, approach yourself, approach your damn self, your own damn self, capital S self, with the same kind of respect, the same kind of honoring, the same kind of wow, that's a teacher right there too. So that's a way that I would answer it. And then once you get that vibe, once you climb the mountain and you touch that point, whatever you call it, God, Yahweh, Allah, Tao, love, truth, whatever, avatar, Atman, Brahma, whatever, Takwon Tanka, heaven, whatever. It's just words, right? Bring it down, come back down the mountain and share it with the people. Share it with, you don't have to become some influencer, with 1 million followers on your social media. Just hang out with your nephew and niece. Yeah. Be a better whatever you do. Yeah. And try to embody it, try to apply it. Otherwise, this wisdom and this love stuff without service, right? This mental intellect, I think, should become wisdom. Otherwise, it's just abstract. The emotional, the heart, the intelligence, which is intuition, compassion, right? It shouldn't just stay, oh, I feel so much, I feel for you, bro, right? We have to download it into physical service, take action, and change our behavior. Otherwise, these are just things that you read in a book. So the hardest thing is to embody it as virtue, right? And no one is perfect. We're all hypocrites. We all fail, right? Everyone has a dark side. Everyone is both Jedi and Sith. Or we have the good wolf and the mean wolf, right? Like supposedly the Native American story. Which one do you feed? And nowadays, a lot of us are feeding the mean wolf, which is fine. I mean, it's necessary. This wolf protects us when we're in danger, but the other one is being neglected. So, yeah, that's how I would answer that question.
Beautiful answer. Yeah, wow. Thank you. So
Yeah,
I
thanks
think,
for the question.
yeah, it was, yeah, a great question. So I think we're gonna end there.
Okay.
So yeah, so thanks again for everybody that tuned in.
Yeah, thank you.
And Paul, how can people find you if they want to learn more from you?
Please don't find me. I'm really bad. I'm really bad at
Oh my gosh.
I'm really bad at communicating. I'm really bad at texting back and emailing. I think I'm born. Back in the day, if you want to reach me, you had to, say I was in California and you were in Europe. Yeah, it would take weeks or months, right? You got to write a letter, you got to send it.
That's you.
Nowadays, man, you got to get back in the same, week or day or
Yeah, same hour.
But so that's covering my ass a little bit. That's my disclaimer. But if you want to reach me, I have, you can try to search for me on social media, Paul
Cool.
C. Wang,
Yeah.
but I have my email. I'll throw out my email, which is info at daocenter.com. So DAO, like Taoism, right, the way, the path, center at daocenter.com, info at. And if you shoot me an email, I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Yeah. And if you want, and I can work with you in whatever capacity. If you want to do acupuncture or acupressure remotely, if you want me to do your birth chart analysis, if you want to talk about some self-cultivation practices, or you want to learn a little bit about self-protection, self-defense, then yeah, I have that kind of menu of offerings.
Many modalities, many offerings. Great.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So if for those who are listening, if you're interested in checking out more events like this, the next event will be on July 23rd, where I'll be interviewing Aviva Bannerman, and she is a ketamine and cannabis-assisted psychotherapist. And so we're going to be talking about how these substances are being used legally in a therapeutic setting in the US to treat PTSD, anxiety, depression, and a few other mental health conditions. So if you're interested in registering for that event, you can go to our website at zayamed.com. Also, I put the links in the bio as well. So other than that, thanks again so much. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Take care.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.